Afterward, when she finally had the quiet to lay the whole thing out and study it, Sorrel decided the ruin was the king's fault. Follow the thread back far enough and it always ended at his door. If Osric had been a smaller man, she would never have started listening for his step in the dark of a corridor. If she had never listened for his step, she would never have taught herself to slip into rooms where a tracker of the outer kennel had no business slipping. And if she had never learned to slip unseen through the hold, she would never have been standing behind the carved moot screen on the coldest night of the winter, close enough to hear him rise before the whole gathered pack and hand her future away in a single, gentle sentence. So if a person were honest about it, none of it had been her doing at all, it had been his. Every last candle's worth. But that reasoning came later. On the night itself, she was only a shape in the shadow of the screen, holding her breath and telling herself she had a right to be there when she knew, full well, she did not. Sorrel had come to Duncrag 3 winters back with a lame hound, a short blade, and no history she would give to anyone who asked. She took the work at the outer kennel that no one else wanted, the cold rounds and the long tracking through the deep wood, and she did it better than trackers who had been born to it. People called her the quiet one. They meant it kindly enough. She let them think quiet was all she was, because a woman who could read a whole room off the set of its shoulders had learned young that it was safest to look as though she read nothing at all. She answered to Sorrel. It was not the name she had been given at birth, but it fit her mouth well enough, and the other one she kept folded away with a small, carved token at the bottom of her chest where no one had ever thought to look. The trouble, if she was going to be honest, had started with the king and a hurt hound at the edge of the wood, on a night when neither of them could sleep. He had not been the king then. He had only been a broad shape crouched in the frost, easing a thorn from her old dog's paw with hands far too careful for a stranger. By the time she understood who he was, she had already spoken to him the way she would speak to any man, plain and unimpressed, and it had been too late to start bowing. So she had not. And he had come back the next sleepless night, and the one after that, until the wood's edge on the dark side of the hold became a thing that belonged only to the two of them. They never named it. Kings did not walk out to meet kennel trackers in the frost, and so by the simple logic of the pack, it was not happening. And a thing that was not happening did not need a name. She had been a fool. She knew that now, behind the screen, with her heart going like a trapped bird, because the Cairn had come to the border in the autumn, and the Cairn did not come to borders to talk. Their alpha, Yoraf, had twice the fighting wolves Duncrag could field, and an old grievance he had been sharpening for a generation, and he had sent word that there were only 2 futures left to choose between. The packs could bleed each other white across the northern wood, or they could be bound by blood of another kind. Yorith had a daughter, Ingrith of the Cairn. Take her, the message ran, and there need be no war. The mood had argued it for 3 nights. Tonight the king would give his answer, and every soul in Duncrag who mattered had crowded the great hall to hear it, and Sorrel, who did not matter at all, had put herself behind the screen where the servers waited, because she could not have stood in her cold loft and simply wondered. Through the fretwork she watched him rise. She had seen Osric be the king before. It never stopped unsettling her, the way the room drew tight around him when he stood, the way grown wolves who feared nothing set down their cups and turned like iron filings toward a lodestone. This was not the man from the wood's edge. This was the thing the wood's edge man carried folded up inside him, let out into the light. He did not make them wait. That was a kindness, she supposed, later. He said that he had weighed every road, and that a king who spent his people's blood to spare his own comfort was no king, but a coward wearing a crown. He said that peace was a heavier thing to carry than a sword, and that he meant to carry it. He said that he would take the Cairn alliance, and Yorith's daughter with it, and that the 2 packs would be one house before the thaw. He chose another future. He said it as gently as a man laying a cloth over something broken, and the hall came apart with the sound of it, wolves on their feet, cups struck against the long tables. A roar of relief so loud it shook dust from the rafters. Sorrel did not move. She had thought she was braced. She was not. Something went out of her chest all at once, quiet and total, the way a coal goes gray when the last of the heat leaves it. And she understood in that cold instant exactly how large the thing had been that she had refused for 3 winters to name. She turned to go before her face could betray her to anyone, and across the whole heaving length of the hall, through a gap in the crowd that opened for half a breath and no longer, the king's eyes found her behind the screen. He should not have been able to. She was a shadow among shadows. But his gaze came to her as surely as her hound came to a whistle, and it did not look like the gaze of a man who had just chosen. His jaw was set for the crowd, his shoulders squared for the crowd, every line of him arranged for the crowd. And down at his side, low, where no one else was watching, his hand moved, 2 fingers folded slow to his palm, and held there. It was the sign. Their sign? From the frost and the dark. The one that had never meant anything grander than wait. I am here, not yet. Then the crowd closed, and a serving girl brushed past her with a tray, and Sorrel was moving, out through the server's door, into the black corridor, with her pulse slamming in her throat. He had chosen another with his mouth, and with his hand. In the dark he had told her something else. Entirely she did not know which of them to believe. She did not sleep. She had not expected to. She sat out the rest of the night on the cold steps above the kennels, with her hound's head heavy on her knee, watching her breath go silver, and turning the 2 things over and over until the edges were smooth, the mouth and the hand, the sentence and the sign. By the time the sky over the eastern wall went from black to the color of old iron, she had decided that the hand had meant nothing. That a man does not fold 2 fingers on purpose in the middle of the worst decision of his life. That she had seen what a gutted woman wanted to see. She had almost made herself believe it. Then she climbed to her loft to change for the dawn round, and opened the door, and stopped. The room was empty. Not untidy, not searched. Empty the way a room is empty after a death, when the living have come through and taken everything that proved a person had been there. Her pallet was stripped to the bare boards. The pegs where her spare cloak and her tracking harness had hung stood empty in a row. Her chest was gone from the foot of the bed. Chest and token and folded name and all, as though it had never sat there catching dust for 3 winters. The little shelf, where she kept her tallow stubs and her whetstone, had been wiped clean. Someone had come into her room in the dark and unmade her. Trackers who were tied to the wrong blood learned young that this was how it happened when a treaty was signed and a pack tidied itself for its new friends. You were not accused, you were not sentenced. You were simply cleared away between one dawn and the next, and the pack woke and found the loft swept and did not ask who had slept there. She stood very still in the doorway and felt the old cold fear climb her spine, the one she had carried since she was a child, the one that said, "They know, they have always known, and they have come for you at last." And then she saw the sill, on the narrow stone ledge below the shuttered window, in a room stripped of every other thing she owned. A single candle was burning, not a tracker's stub. This was good, wax, pale and clean, tall as her hand, its flames steady in the still air, and it had been set there with care, dead in the center of the ledge, as though it were the one thing in the room that had been meant to stay. She crossed to it without deciding to. She knew the shape of it. That was the part that made the hair stand on her arms. She knew it the way you know a word, in a language you have not spoken since you were small, a shape out of somewhere far behind her, out of firelight, and a voice she could no longer hear, and she could not for her life say what it meant, or why the sight of one clean candle burning in an emptied room should make her want to weep and run at the same time. She reached out and pinched the flame dead between 2 fingers. It hurt. She was glad it hurt. She slid the warm candle into the pocket over her heart and told herself it was because good wax should not be wasted, and did not believe herself for a moment. Boots on the ladder. She had her back to the door, and her face arranged into nothing by the time it opened. It was Bly, the youngest of the outer kennel, all elbows and worry, and behind him Marn, who was twice his age and had never in Sorrel's memory worried about anything out loud. They crowded into the empty doorway and took in the bare pegs and the stripped bed, and Bly's mouth opened and shut. "So," he said at last, too brightly, "you have heard, then." "I have heard the pack has a bride coming," Sorrel said. "The whole hold heard that." "That is not," Marn began, and stopped, and looked at the room again, and Sorrel watched her decide not to say the thing she had come to say. "Whose order was this?" "I do not know. It was done while I sat with the dogs." "It was the warden's order," Bly said. "I saw the clearing detail. They said the warden sent them himself, before the second bell." He caught Marn's look and hurried on, the way he always did, laying down cheer like a man laying planks over a hole. "But that is likely nothing to fret over. They are moving folk about all over the hold, to make room for the Carn party. Half the East Range is being emptied. You will have a better billet out of it, I should think." "Bly," said Marn. "It is only that the warden does not empty a room and leave the candle burning," Bly said, and then heard himself, and shut his mouth so fast, his teeth clicked. Sorrel went cold from her scalp to her heels. "What candle?" she said. Neither of them answered. Marn was looking at the bare sill, where a thin curl of smoke still hung in the gray light, and then she was looking at Sorrel with an expression Sorrel had never once seen on her before, not in 3 winters of blizzards and bad tracks and worse news. Marn, who did not worry, looked afraid. "He wants you," Marn said quietly. "The warden. Now he sent us up to bring you down and, Sorrel, he said, to bring you gentle." She wet her lips. "I have carried a great many summons off that man in my life. He has never once told me to be gentle." The warden's hall lay under the old part of Duncrag, where the stone was black with the smoke of 100 winters. Sorrel had crossed that floor 100 times to take an order and cross back out. She had never crossed it feeling like a rabbit walking into a snare it could already see. Halvard, warden of the hunt, stood at the great table with a map of the deep woods spread under his hands, and he did not look up when she came in. He was a big man, gone iron-gray, with a stillness that younger wolves mistook for calm, until they saw how fast it could end. It was Halvard who had found her at the border 3 winters back, half-starved, with a lame hound and a folded name and a wrong-blood look about her, and asked no questions, and told her a wolf who could track as she could, would always have a place at his fire. He was the nearest thing to a father she had known since the firelight, and the voice she could no longer hear, which was why it frightened her, that her whole body had gone quiet and watchful the moment she crossed his door. "You were behind the moot screen last night," Halvard said, still not looking up. "Not a question." "I was seeing to a hound about to whelp in the server's passage," Sorrel said. The lie came out smooth and whole. She had a great many of them, kept sharp, and she hated spending one on him. Said Halvard, and moved a carved marker across the map with one thick finger, and let it lie there between them. And she understood that he knew she was lying and had chosen, for reasons of his own, to let it stand. That frightened her more than a blow would have. "My room was cleared in the night," she said to fill the silence. "On your order." "I am told it was." At last he looked up, and his pale eyes went over her face, the way she went over a track, reading things she had not meant to leave. "You are being moved, Sorrel, up in the world as it happens. You should be pleased. Wardens do not clear a tracker's room in the dark to please her." "No," he agreed. "They do not." He straightened, and the map curled shut, and he came around the table toward her, unhurried, and she had to lock her knees to keep from stepping back. "The Carn party rides for us within 4 days, the bride among them. Lady Ingrid does not take the high road. It is too easy to bleed a wedding party in the open. And there are those on both sides who would like this marriage dead before it is made." She comes the quiet way, through the deep wood. Something in Sorrel had already guessed. She made herself keep still and let him say it. The wood is mine to bring her through, Halvard said. And the tracker who walks at the bride's side, from the border stones to the gates of Duncrag, and answers for her life with her own, was named to me last night, by the king. In front of the whole moot, he watched her take the weight of it. He named you. The floor did not move. It only felt as though it had. He had chosen another future with his mouth. He had folded 2 fingers to his palm in the dark. And now, before all the pack, he had bound her to the side of the very woman he had chosen. She could not see the board. She could only feel herself lifted and set upon it by hands she could not name, and she did not know if the hand was the man from the wood's edge, the king in the hall, or the gray father watching her now with something behind his eyes. She was too rattled to read and would spend a long time afterward wishing she had. "Why me?" she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Ask the king," said Halvard. "I did not. You cannot mean I have a choice." The warden almost smiled. "No," he said, not unkindly, "you do not." The door at the end of the hall opened, the room drew tight, and every warden along the walls came off his ease. She felt him come the way she felt weather change. The king of all the northern woods stood in the doorway, in a plain, dark riding cloak, and there was nothing of the frost or the hurt hound in his face. He looked at her the way a king looks at a useful tool, just brought to him, cool and certain and 1,000 miles from the wood's edge, and it took everything she had, not to flinch from it. "Warden, she understands the duty?" "She does, Majesty." "Good." His eyes came to Sorrel and stayed there one beat, longer than a king's eyes should stay on a kennel tracker. "You know the deep paths better than anyone in my hold, and the quiet ones best of all." A pause, small as a folded finger. "Keep to the quiet ways, bring her to me safe, and speak of them to no one." "Can you do that?" It was a plain instruction about a forest road. Any warden in the room would have heard nothing else in it. But he had leaned, just faintly, on the quiet ways, and he was looking at her while he said it, as though the words had a floor beneath their floor. And against the warmth of the candle in the pocket, over her heart, she felt the whole night tilt and refuse to come level. "Yes, Majesty," she said. "Good," said the king again, and turned and was gone. And the wardens breathed, and the map uncurled under Halvard's hand as though nothing had happened at all. Sorrel walked out into the gray morning understanding 2 things and not the third. He had chosen another, and he had bound her to that other side with his own mouth. And somewhere against her heart a candle, she could not place, had gone warm again, and until she knew whose hand had lit it, and what its small flame was meant to say, she could not know which of these men was saving her, which was spending her, and which was doing both at once. The deep wood did not care that a king had chosen a bride. That was the first mercy Sorrel had been granted in 2 days, and she took it greedily. Out past the last of the charcoal burners' clearings, where the pines closed overhead and the light came down green and old, there were no moot screens, and no swept rooms and no candles she could not name. There was only the track and a cold and nettle, ranging ahead with her gray muzzle to the ground, and the plain, clean work of reading a wood which Sorrel could do better than she could do anything else alive. She had ridden out at first light with a dozen of Duncrag's wardens and her 2 shadows, Bly fretting and Marn saying nothing, to fetch a bride from the border stones. The Carn party was waiting when they came down through the birches to the stones. And Sorrel's first thought, uncharitable and immediate, was that they had dressed for a wood they had never walked. Fine cloaks, soft boots, horses too good for the ground. Their captain was a hard-faced man named Roth who looked at the trees the way a man looks at a crowd he does not trust, and who gave Sorrel's plain leathers one flat glance, and dismissed her. His riders sat their horses in a tight knot, hands never far from their hilts, flinching at every crack of the wood, settling in the cold. They were a long way from their own country and they knew it, and men who felt hunted made mistakes, and Sorrel marked each of their faces the way she marked everything, without ever seeming to look at all. Then the bride pushed back her hood, and Sorrel forgot to keep dismissing her back. She did not know what she had built in her head across 2 sleepless days, something to hate probably. Something soft and gloating, that had been handed the future, for the price of being born to the right father. Lady Ingrid of the Cairn was none of it. She was younger than Sorrel had expected, and far more tired, with a still watchful face and eyes that went over the Duncrag party once, quick and thorough, counting blades and reading faces, and came to rest on Sorrel a beat longer than they rested anywhere else. "You are the tracker," Ingrid said. It was not quite a question. Her voice was low and even, a voice used to being listened to. "They told me the king sent his best to bring me through. I confess I expected someone who looked as though he enjoyed it more." "I do not enjoy or not enjoy," my lady Sorrel said. "I bring you through safe, that is the whole of it." Something moved at the corner of the bride's mouth. That was not a smile. "How restful," she said, "to meet someone with no opinion about me at all." And she swung down from her horse before her own people could help her, and Sorrel understood, with a small sinking feeling she did not want, that this was not going to be a woman she could comfortably hate. This was a woman being delivered like a chest of treaty goods, who had decided to walk into it with her chin up, and Sorrel knew that walk. She had walked it herself into Duncrag 3 winters back. They turned the party for home, and the wood swallowed them. The king met them at the ford. He came with a small honor guard which was proper, and he sat his horse at the water's edge in the failing light, like something the wood had made, which was not proper at all. And Sorrel felt the whole party straighten around her, every wolf of them turning toward him without meaning to. He greeted the bride with the king's courtesy, grave and warm and perfectly weighed, and Ingrid answered in kind. And the two of them were so smooth together that Sorrel's chest ached with a bitterness she was ashamed of. Then, while the wardens watered the horses, he crossed the shingle to where she stood apart, and for the length of a few words, there was no one near enough to hear. "The mare is favoring her off-hind," he said quietly, "of nothing of her horse. And your hound, does the old wound in her paw still trouble her when it turns cold?" He said it low without the king in it. He said it as the man from the frost and the dark had said things. The man who had eased a thorn from a lame dog with hands too careful for a stranger. And Nettle, hearing him, went to him and pushed her gray head against his knee, as though 3 winters were nothing at all. "She manages," Sorrel said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that, later, because nothing else about her was. "Good," said Osric, and looked at her one beat too long, the way he had in the warden's hall, as though there were a whole sentence he was holding behind his teeth. Then the king came back down over his face like a shutter, and he turned to remount, and the moment closed. She hated that it had cracked something. She hated it with her whole cold heart. She was sworn now to keep this bride alive, and every hour she rode, she felt the wrongness of it settle heavier on her. A tracker did not choose the trail she was set to follow. She had learned that young in the firelight and the cold that came after it. But she had never before been made to guard the very thing that had emptied her out. And she did not know how a person was meant to carry a duty and a wound in the same 2 hands, and not let go of one of them somewhere in the dark. They rode on into the dusk, and it was Ingrid, drawing her horse level, who said the thing that turned Sorrel's mind off her own foolishness and back onto the dark. "Your king," the bride murmured, watching Osric's back, "rides like a man who expects to be shot." She was not wrong. Sorrel had already seen it, and made herself not see it. His wardens were set wide and forward, not close and easy as an honor guard should ride. His reins were gathered in his left hand, his right hung loose and empty at his side, and his eyes never stopped moving along the black line of the ridge above them where the last light died in the pines, where a patient man with a bow would wait. Nettle knew before Sorrel did. The old hound's head came up off the trail, ears hard forward, a low sound starting in her chest that Sorrel had heard perhaps 3 times in 3 winters, and never once for nothing. Sorrel had trusted that sound with her life before, and lived each time to trust it again. Sorrel had her hand on her blade and her mouth open to call the warning before her mind had finished catching up, and that half a heartbeat was the only warning any of them got. The first arrow took a Karn rider out of his saddle. The second would have killed the king outright if he had still been where he had been, but Sorrel was already moving, had flung herself sideways into his horse's shoulder without deciding to, and the shaft went past his ear close enough to part the air, and then the whole ridge came apart into men and blades and screaming horses. They came down fast and quiet, wrapped and faceless, and they did not go for the bride. Sorrel saw it even in the chaos, the cold, clear part of her that never stopped tracking. A raiding party, after a treaty prize, takes the bride. A raiding party after ransom takes the horses. These men cut straight through their own footing and the easier targets and the whole shrieking tangle of it, straight for one man, the way water runs downhill, and the one man was Osric. She did not think. There was no time to think, and she was glad of it, because thinking would have made her remember she was sworn to the bride and not to the king. Her body had already chosen. She was at his side and then in front of him, and the first man to reach them went down before he understood a kennel tracker could hold a blade at all, and the second, she dropped with 2 hard strokes, and a third opened a hot line across her forearm that she did not feel until much later. Osric fought at her back, and he fought well, too well, with the economy of a man who had done it before and expected to do it again, and some far part of her filed that away with everything else that did not fit. Off to her left, a Duncrag warden went down under 2 blades at once, and Sorrel could not reach him, and hated that she could not. Behind her, she heard Ingrid calling orders to her own people in a voice gone flat and hard, with no bride in it at all, and the same cold corner of Sorrel's mind noted that the Karn woman did not scream and did not run, and kept it. Nutta latched onto a wrapped man's leg and dragged him down, and Sorrel put him out of the fight without looking, and still they came, and still every last one of them came for the king and not for anyone else. Then a whistle cut the dark, one note, and the men broke off as cleanly as they had come, up into the pines, gone, leaving their dead and taking their wounded. And that was the thing that turned Sorrel cold all the way through. Bandits did not retreat on a whistle. Bandits did not leave in good order. Only soldiers did that. The wood went quiet. Her arm began, distantly, to burn. "You are hurt," said Osric, and reached for her, and she stepped back out of his reach, because if he touched her now, she did not trust what her face would do. "You are not surprised," she said instead. Low, so only he would hear it, with the warden shouting and the horses plunging all around them. "Someone just tried to put an arrow through you in your own wood, and you have not once looked surprised. This is not the first time." For half a breath something true showed through, tired and old and afraid, and then it was gone. "Let me see to your arm," he said gently. "Answer me, Sorrel." He said her name like a door closing. "You will bind that arm, and you will say to anyone who asks that we were set upon by Karn outriders who did not want this marriage. You will not say soldiers. You will not say they came for me. Do you understand? If it is known the king was hunted in his own wood on the eve of the treaty, there will be a war by the new moon, and every soul who died tonight will have died for nothing. It was, and she hated it, a good reason. She was coming to learn that he always had one, and that his reasons were the most dangerous thing about him, because they were never quite wrong, and a woman could follow a trail of reasons like his, a very long way into the dark before she thought to ask who had laid it down for her to find. She bound her arm with a strip torn from her own shirt and told the wardens what he had told her to tell them, and the lie sat in her mouth like a stone all the way home. But later, when the dead were gathered and the party moved on with torches and drawn blades, Sorrel walked the ground where the attackers had waited, because she could not help it, and what she read there took the last of the warmth out of the night. They had not stumbled onto the party. They had lain in that spot for hours. She read it off the ground, the way another woman reads a letter, the flattened moss, where men had waited without fires, the scuffed bark where a bow had rested against a trunk through a long cold watch, the boot prints too good for bandits, cut from proper leather, heels worn even and square the way a drilling soldiers wear. They had known the ford, and the dusk, and the narrow place past it, where a mounted line would have to string out thin. They had known, in short, the quiet way through the deep wood, and only 3 living souls knew the quiet way. She stood in the dark with the cold truth of it, and found she could not make herself say all 3 of their names, even alone, even in her own head. Duncrag swallowed them back inside its black walls before midnight, and, after that, the days ran one into the next. And Sorrel could not afterward have said when she stopped fighting and started falling. She was kept close. That was the shape the trap took, though it did not feel like a trap then. She knew the wood, and she had bled in it for the crown, and so it was the most natural thing that the tracker who had guided the bride should stay on through the wedding season. And Osric, who had a whole kingdom of reasons never to be near her, kept finding them anyway. He came to the mews at the cold end of a morning, while she sawed a nettle's paw and stayed too long, saying almost nothing, watching her work with the ease of the wood's edge man, and none of the distance of the king. He fell into step beside her on the wall, one grey dusk, and listened to her read the tracks of the men who had fled as though it were the only thing in the realm that mattered, and did not once try to charm her, which was, somehow, worse. When she pushed him about what the arrow in the wood had really been, he would turn it smooth and kind, until she found herself 3 subjects downstream, with no memory of the current that had carried her there. Once on the dark stair below the armory, they passed close in a space too narrow for 2, and neither stepped back as quickly as they should have. For the length of a held breath, she caught the leather and the cold and the low scent that was only him, and her whole traitor body leaned toward it before her pride could haul it upright. He said her name. Only that, only once. She went on up the stair with her heart slamming and did not look back, and heard him not follow, and somehow, his not following undid her, worse than a hand on her arm would have. She let him. That was the shameful part. She was falling, and she knew she was falling, and the knowing did not slow her at all. The candle stayed in her pocket, over her heart, unspent and unexplained, and she could not throw it away, and could not ask him what it meant, because asking would mean admitting she had kept it. The old life reached for her only once in those weeks, and it reached in the dark. She came back to her billet after a late watch to find a thing on her pillow that stopped her at the door. A sprig of dried bittercress, tied with grey thread. To anyone else it was a weed. To Sorrel, it was a summons in a language she had prayed for 3 winters she would never speak again, and it meant only one thing. Someone from the wrong blood people, the folk she had been taken out of, and sent in to serve, was inside Duncrag and wanted her. She burned the bittercress in the very candle she could not throw away, and she did not go, not that night, and she lay awake understanding that whatever she had come here to do, she no longer had the smallest wish to do it, and that this itself was a kind of treason to everyone who had ever counted on her. The warden sent for her the day after, and this time there was nothing gentle in the summons at all. Halvard received her in his black hall as he always had, and for a while it was almost a comfort, the old gruff voice, the map under his hands, the fire in the grate. He asked after her arm, and asked lightly what she had made of the men in the wood. And when she said, "Soldiers," his eyes went still and pleased in a way she was too tired to weigh. She had always seen, clearly, he told her, clearer than the fine folk upstairs, who had never gone hungry a day. The crown eats its wardens and its trackers and its wrong blood strays, he said, and calls it duty, and weeps very prettily over the graves after. Do not let a soft look off a young king make you forget where you came from, nor who was there in the cold when the crown was not. She left with the old grievance sitting warm and familiar in her chest, where he had set it, and it was days before it struck her that she had gone in troubled and come out comforted, and that Halvard had always had a gift for making his own words feel like her oldest thoughts. It was Ingrid who said the thing out loud that Sorrel had been refusing to. The bride found her on the north wall 2 mornings later, wind snapping their cloaks, and stood beside her a while in silence before she spoke. "You watch him," Ingrid said, not unkindly. "The way a starving woman watches a table she has not been asked to sit at." Sorrel said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not be a lie or a ruin. "I am not blind, Tracker, and I am not cruel," the bride went on, quieter. "I did not ask for him any more than he asked for me. We are both being spent to stop a war. I only wonder if you know that he watches you the very same way, and that a man who looks at one woman like that and marries another builds himself a very long unhappiness." She turned to go, then paused. "Whatever you are," she added, softer still, "and I think you are a great deal more than a tracker, be careful. There is something wrong in this house. I have felt it since the ford." That night Sorrel went looking for him, telling herself it was to force the truth about the arrows, about the quiet way, about the third name she still could not say. She found him alone in the old library, with a single lamp and the treaty maps, and he looked up, and the king was not there, only the man, tired to the bone and unguarded for once, and the thing she had been damning for 3 winters finally came up over the wall. "I cannot keep doing this," she said, and her voice shook, and she let it. "You chose her, you said it in front of the whole pack, and then you fold your hand in the dark and leave me a flame I cannot name, and you seek me out and you look at me like that, and I do not know if you are saving me or using me. And I am so tired, Osric, I am so tired of not knowing which." He came around the table slowly, "The way you cross to something that might bolt. Then let me tell you what the candle means," he said very low, and reached for her hand. "It is the oldest vow my people keep, and I lit it myself, and it says only one thing." And that was the moment the alarm bell began to ring. The bell was the stable bell, and the stable was on fire. Whatever Osric had been about to say died in his mouth, and the king came down over him all at once, and then they were both running. The East Range was a wall of orange when they reached it, smoke rolling low and the horses screaming, and there was no more room in Sorrel for candles, or vows, or the shape of her own ruined heart. There was only the work. She went in low under the smoke, where the air still lived, and got the head ropes and the blindfolds, and hauled terrified animals out one by one into the yard, and Osric worked the stall beside her, a king with soot to the elbows, and no thought at all for his crown. Once a beam came down in a roar of sparks between them, and she lost him in the smoke, and her heart stopped until his voice cut through it, calling her name, steady, telling her which stalls still stood. They worked to that voice, the two of them, the way 2 hands work, and between them and the wardens who came running, they lost not a single horse. When the last mare stood shaking safe in the yard, he found her through the murk and gripped her shoulder once, hard, and neither said a word, because there were no words yet that would not have been too large. It was set. She knew it before the flames were even down. The fire had started in 3 places at once, and no lamp does that, and a stable hand swore he had seen a shape go over the wall in the smoke. Someone had wanted Duncrag looking the wrong way tonight, and Sorrel added it, cold and hard, to the boot prints and the quiet way and the whistle in the dark, and said nothing, because Osric had asked her to say nothing, and she was so tired of the weight of all the things she was not saying. It was the dead middle of the night, before the yard emptied, and the two of them ended up alone in the tack room with one guttering lamp, filthy, and wrung out and shaking a little with the aftermath, and he finished it. He told her quiet, with no king left in him at all. "I lit the candle myself," he said, "the night I chose her. I came up to your loft after the moot when you were still down with the dogs, and I set it on your sill with my own hand." He would not look at her while he said it, which was how she knew it was true. "It is the oldest right my people keep, older than the crown, older than the wall. You light it for the one you could not name in the daylight. And it says only this: the one I did not choose aloud is the one I chose in truth. Come and find me." His voice went rough. I could not say it plainer. "A king, who is known to love a woman among his own wardens, has handed his enemies a knife to hold at her throat. I thought, fool that I was, that you would understand the flame, and come, and I could tell you the rest in the dark where it was safe. Instead you carried it in your pocket for a month, and hated me for it, and I deserved every hour of that, and I would light it again tomorrow." He finally looked at her then, and there was nothing kingly left to hide behind. Only a man who had laid the truest thing he owned on the dirty floor between them and was waiting to see whether she would step on it. Sorrel had spent her whole life learning to want nothing, because wanting was how they held you. She felt the last of that careful, starving discipline go out of her like breath. She crossed the little room and kissed him, soot and all, and he made a sound against her mouth like a man who had been holding still for a very long time. And for a moment there was nothing in the world but the warmth of him and the plain, unbearable fact that she was wanted, herself, the whole of her, for no reason but wanting. She had never once in her life let herself have that. She let herself have it now, her forehead against his, both of them worn down to the truth at last. And for one night she believed it could simply be true. She did not tell him, the one thing that could have undone it all. She did not tell him her true name, nor whose hand had sent her into his house, nor that the chest with her whole buried self inside it had gone out her door on the warden's order and never come back. She sat with him in the dark a long while, her head against his shoulder, and told herself there would be time. Outside, somewhere in the ruined dark, the man who had lit the stable was already counting what he had learned tonight. How fast Duncrag woke, how far its king would run into a fire, and for whom. But that was tomorrow's grief. Tonight there was only the warmth, and she took it, and did not count the cost, because she had counted the cost of everything her whole life long. And just this once, she wanted to be a fool like anyone else. There is a special cruelty to a false dawn. It looks exactly like a real one. She woke to gray light and the ache of a happiness she did not trust, and to the immovable fact that no candle in the world had changed. He still had to marry Ingrid. The vow on her sill was a private truth, and a private truth does not stop a war, and in 9 days the king would stand up in the great hall and take the Carn bride to wife while the whole realm cheered, and what had passed between them in the tack room would become a secret they carried in the dark for the rest of their lives, if they were lucky, and a rope for their enemies, if they were not. She lay and watched the gray light find the shape of him in her narrow bed, the king of all the northern wood, asleep with soot still in the creases of his knuckles, and she let herself have the whole impossible picture for as long as the light took to strengthen. He woke and told her low that he was working to break the need for the wedding, and she wanted to believe him, the way she wanted to breathe, and she had learned long ago that wanting to believe a thing was exactly how a clever hand made a fool of you. Then she got up, because one of them had to be sensible, and sensible was the only country she had ever truly lived in. The clever hand made its next move at the welcome feast. Yorth's Imboy had come ahead of the wedding party, and the hall was full, and Sorrel stood at the wall in her guard's leathers watching the high table, when her nose caught it under the wine, and the roast, the faint bitter almond wrongness she had smelled once before on a colonnade in another woman's story, and would never mistake again. She was moving before she had decided to. She reached the table as the cup came to Osric's hand, and she took it from him, plain and quiet, the way a server takes an empty one, and set it down, and met his eyes, and he read her face and did not drink. No one else saw a thing. But her own heart was going like a hammer, because it was the second time now she had stood between this man and a quiet death, each time dressed as something ordinary. A cup, an arrow in a wood, each time caught half a breath from too late. A day would come when she was looking the wrong way. She knew it the way she knew weather. Later, in the cold of the map room, he took both her hands and asked her, again, to leave it to him, to trust him. To say nothing and let him close his fist on the traitor in his own time. Because a king who cries poison with no proof only teaches the poisoner to be quicker. You keep asking me to trust you, she said, and telling me nothing. I am asking you to stay alive, he said, while I earn the right to tell you everything. And she agreed, because she loved him, and she did not trust him, and she was learning that a person could hold both of those at once, love and doubt, and set neither of them down. She had begun to understand that this was simply what love was, when you had never once been allowed any, a weight you chose to carry with both hands, over bad ground, in the dark, and went anyway. That night, she answered the summons she had been refusing for a month. The bitter cress led her down through the lower hold to a cellar that smelled of turned earth, and the man waiting there was old and stooped, and she knew his face the way you know a thing from before you had words for things. Evo had bounced her on his knee in a pharaoh camp a lifetime ago, before the crown's men came, before the cold that came after. He wept when he saw her. He called her by the name she had folded away, and it went through her like a blade. No one had called her Eloin in longer than she could hold in her head. The name was a door, and behind it was firelight, and a mother's voice she could no longer hear, and the cold that came after, the year the crown's men rode through the camps, and the world she was born into simply ended. Here was old Ivo, weeping, prizing the lid up with two trembling hands. They said you had gone soft in the king's house, Evo said, holding her hands. I told them no. Not our girl, not after everything the crown took from us. And then, gently, terribly, he began to lay it out. The pharaoh were ready. The crown was rotten and near to falling, and when it fell the old people would rise and take back what was theirs, and Eloin, daughter of the camps, placed in the enemy's own hall as a child, more winters ago than she could count, would be there at the turning to open the door. It was coming soon. She need only hold, and watch and wait for the word. Whose word? Sorrel heard herself ask. Who commands the pharaoh now, Ivo? Who sends you? And the old man smiled, proud and trusting and doomed, and said, Why, the same hand that has kept us alive all these years, girl. The same hand that took a starving pharaoh child off the border and put her where she could do the most good. The warden's word. It has always been the warden's word. The cellar was very cold. Sorrel stood in it and felt every separate thing she had been refusing to see slide toward the same terrible center, and she smiled at Ivo, and thanked him, and told him she would hold and watch and wait, and lied to the last kind old man from her whole lost life as easily as breathing, because a part of her already understood exactly where the trail led, and could not yet bear to walk to the end of it. She should have gone to Osric. Instead, she went to make certain, because certainty was the only religion she had ever been allowed, and a tracker did not name a beast off one print. The warden's record room lay off Hallvard's black hall, and she went to it in the last dark, before dawn, to read the muster rolls, to learn which men had leave the night of the ford, which boots drew from the good leather stores, who could have known the quiet way. She had her hand on the door when she heard, inside, the soft sound of a drawer sliding, and she went still, and eased the door open, and found the king of all the northern wood standing at the warden's own strongbox with a sheaf of papers in his hand. He had a warden's lantern, hooded down to a thread of light, and his cloak was dark and plain, and he had come the way she would have come, quiet, alone, in the 1 hour the record room stood unwatched. He was not startled. That was the thing she would remember afterward. He straightened slowly, and looked at her across the little room full of muster rolls and dead men's ledgers, and he did not reach for a lie. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Sorrel," he said, very calm, very careful, and something in the calm frightened her more than a shout would have. "You told me to leave it to you," she said. Her voice came out wrong. "And here you are in the dark, going through the warden's papers behind his back. Halvard, my Halvard." She heard how the "my" sounded and hated it. "Tell me what this is." He set the papers down. And then, instead of answering, he said a thing that stopped the blood in her. "I have been trying to find the words for months," Osric said quietly, "to tell you that I know who you are, Eloan of the Pharaoh." The room tilted. Her true name, the one folded at the bottom of a chest that had gone out her door on the warden's order, in the king's mouth, plain as anything. She had guarded that name the way a miser guards the last coin between himself and the dark. She had not spoken it aloud herself in 3 winters, and he had been holding it all this time, turning it over in the quiet. The way she turned over a candle, she could not throw away. It should have felt like being seen. It felt like being caught, you knew. It was not a question. It came out of her in pieces, at the wood's edge, all of it. "You knew what I was, and you let me. You let me think." She could not finish. The whole shape of her life, since the frost and the dark heaved, and rearranged itself into something unbearable. A king does not walk out to meet a kennel tracker in the cold for no reason. A king walks out to keep an eye on a knife he already knows is in his house. "It was all managing me," she whispered. "The wood, the candle, keeping me close. You knew I was sent, and you kept your enemy's blade where you could watch it, and you let me fall in love with the watching." "No." He came toward her and she went back, and he stopped at once, the way he always stopped, and she hated that too. "Yes, I knew. I have known almost since the beginning, and it is the exact reason I know you are not part of it." His voice cracked at last, the steadiness gone. "A blade sent to get close to a king makes herself easy to love. Alone she flatters, she softens. She never once stands on a chair or a screen and tells him to his face that the whole rotten realm is his fault. You spoke to me as though I were a man and not a throne, when everyone I have ever met wanted something and hid it behind a bow. You bled for me at the ford before you had a single reason to. Whatever you were sent here to be, it is not what you are. I cleared you the first cold night, and I have been trying to save your life ever since, because the man who sent you throws away his tools when he is done with them, and I could not bear to watch you be thrown away." "The man who sent me," she said numbly. "You already know." He said it gently, which was the worst of all. The quiet way that only 3 living souls knew. "The soldier's boots, the coin behind every blade that has come for me. Halvard has been bleeding this crown for 20 years and building his own out of the pieces. He needs the war. He stoked Yorat's grievance, and he hunts me in my own wood, and when the realm falls into blood, he means to rise as the strong hand that saves it. And your people, Eloan, your good and wronged and desperate people, he has been feeding their fire the whole time, so that when it comes they will die in his front rank believing they fight for themselves." He drew a breath. "The grievance you carry, the words in your own mouth about what the crown took, some of it is true, more than I would like. That he planted the rest, in you and in 100 others, the way a man plants a field he means to burn. Your hatred was his craft. He has held your name and your blood over you since you were a child, and called it kindness, and you have loved him for it." And that was the thing that broke her, because it was true, and she could feel it being true all the way down, every certainty she had ever owned turning to another man's handiwork in her hands. She thought of every hard, true thing she had ever believed about the crown and what was owed to her people, and watched them come apart into his voice, Halvard's voice, patient by the fire, telling a hungry child what the world was and who had made it so. She could not find the seam between what was hers and what was his, and was not certain there had ever been one. It was the loneliest thing she had ever felt, to stand inside her own convictions and no longer know whose they were. She did not scream. She wished, later, that she had. She only backed away from him, from the papers, from her own name in his mouth, and said, "You still used it, you knew, and you let me love you, and you never told me." He said her name again, the true one, soft, like a hand held out, and she could not take it. It was not that she thought he had lied about the candle, she believed him, and that was the unbearable part. He had known her to the bone and chosen her anyway, and never once trusted her with the knowing, and she had spent her whole life being known better than she knew herself, by men who called it love, and could not tell any more whether this was different or only kinder. And she turned and walked out into the dark, and went to her lasting shame, to the only man who had ever taken her in. Halvard was awake. Halvard, she would think later, was always awake. And he took one look at her face, and set down his cup, and crossed the black hall to her, and his big hands came down on her shoulders, and the old gruff voice said her name, the false one, the kennel one, and asked her what had been done to her. And Sorrel, who had walked the whole way down assembling the truth bone by bone, looked up into the face of the man who had pulled a starving child off the border and made her a weapon and called it a father, and let herself weep, because it was not hard, and because a beast that thinks itself unseen comes closer. He smelled of the same pipe smoke he always had, the smell of every safe evening she had ever known, and that was the cruelest part, that her body still eased toward him, even as her mind laid out what he was. He stroked her hair the way he had when she was small, and new to the kennels, and murmured that she was safe now, that he had her, and each kind word landed like a stone, because she was counting them the way he had taught her to count tracks, and every one was a lie wearing the face of the only love she had ever trusted. "He used me," she said, which was even true. "The king. He knew what I was the whole time." "I know, girl," Halvard said, and his voice was so gentle. "I hoped to spare you it. I truly did." He drew her to the fire and sat her down and pressed a cup into her hands. "But you must hear the rest of it now, because there is no more time to be soft. The wedding is in 9 days and the crown means to use it. Once the Karn are bound to him and his back is safe, Osric means to have done with the pharaoh for good. A quiet purge. The camps burned, the old blood ended, all of it dressed up as putting down rebels. I have seen the orders." He had not. She knew he had not, the way she knew her own heartbeat. "There is one way to stop it. One. You must stand up before Yorith, at the wedding. You, the king's own sworn protector, the woman all of them have watched guard his life. And you must tell them what the king truly is, that he set the fire himself to blame our people, that he means to break the treaty in blood. Yorath will pull his daughter, and his peace. The court will turn, and Osric will fall, and there are good strong houses ready to steady the realm when he does." His eyes were kind and patient and utterly certain. "It must come from you. From no one else will they believe it." He said it all so reasonably. That was his gift, the one he had used on her 1,000 times and she had never once seen. He did not rage, and he did not plead. He simply laid a road down in front of her. One calm, true-sounding stone at a time. "The crown is rotten. Your people will burn. Only you can stop it." And he trusted her feet to follow it the way they always had, because he had spent 3 winters teaching those feet where to go. And the terrible thing was, how well it would have worked. A week ago, she would have walked into that hall and burned the man she loved to the ground and called it justice, and never once known whose hand was at her back. And there it was, laid out plain, the whole trap, with her set at the center of it. As the blade, she knew it all now. The fire he blamed on the crown was his own. The quiet way was his. The boots were his wardens. Evo's fire was his fire. Her hatred was his craft. He had emptied her room and taken her name and kept it in a box to hold over her, and he had lit no candle, because the candle had never been his. The candle had been the one true thing in the whole rotten winter. She went back through all of it while he stroked her hair, the way she would walk a trail backward to its start. the stores that never came, the orders that contradicted one another, that she had blamed on the fine folk upstairs because Halvard had taught her to blame them, the extra watch, the whistle in the dark that only soldiers answer to. Every loose thread she had ever pulled ran back to this fire and this man and this gentle voice, and she had never followed one to its end, because he had been standing at the end of all of them, and she had loved him too well to look. She sat in the warmth of the man who had arranged her entire life, and understood that the warmth was the cage. So she did the only thing 3 winters at his side had taught her to do. She dried her eyes. She let the old grievance rise up in her face where he could see it, the grievance he had grown there himself, and she gave it back to him like a gift. "Tell me where to stand," she said, "and I will bring him down." Halvard smiled, and it was the proudest she had ever seen him, and it made her want to be sick. "That is my girl," he said. "That is my good Pharaoh girl." She let him keep the name a moment longer, his good Pharaoh girl, because it bought her the one thing she needed most, which was for him to believe he had already won. She had learned that from him too. Let the beast think itself. Let it come close, then close the hand. She walked out of the black hall, with the trap folded up small in her chest, and it was the longest walk of her life because she had 9 days, and no proof any man alive could not argue away, and only her own word and her own wits. And she knew that if she set one foot wrong in that hall, the whole realm would drown in a war built by the man who had taught her how to walk quiet in the first place. She meant to use every quiet step of it against him. She did not wait 9 days. She could not. She spent 3 of them, tracking, quiet and patient, the way he had taught her, and by the 4th she had what she needed, and on the 5th she took it not to Osric, but straight into the open, because a thing done in the dark could always be called a lie in the dark, and this had to be done where every eye in the realm was watching. She chose the welcome rite for the wedding party, when Yorith himself rode in at last with his host at his back, and the great hall was packed to the walls, Carn and Duncrag and every house between. Halvard stood near the high table, patient, waiting for the moment he had built, and when the hall quieted he found her at the wall, and gave the smallest nod, and stepped forward, and said in his grave, honest warden's voice that there was a thing the visiting Alpha must hear, and that the king's own sworn protector would speak it. Every face in the hall turned to Sorrel. She felt the shape of the moment he had made for her, the blade pointed where he wanted it. She looked once at Osric, who did not know she was here, whose face had gone white, with a fear that was not for himself. She looked at Ingrid, still and watchful. She looked at Yorith, leaning forward, a hard old wolf, ready to be told his daughter had been wronged, and she turned the blade around. "There has been a traitor in Duncrag for 20 years, she said, and her voice carried, because she had learned long ago, to be heard over a howling wind. He has bled the crown and hunted the king in his own wood, and set the fire in the stables with his own warden's hands, and stoked a war between 2 peoples who had no need of one. He took a pharaoh child off the border, and made her a weapon, and called it mercy. I know, because I am the child, and he is the man, and he stands there at the high table, in a warden's grey. The hall broke into noise, and she cut through it. His name is Halvard, warden of the hunt. Search his strongbox and his kennels, and the false floor of his record room. You will find a paymaster's ledger in his own hand, and Carn coin he never had honest cause to hold, and the same bitter poison that was in the king's cup at the feast 4 nights gone. Search it now, Alpha Yorith, while he stands here and cannot reach it, and see whether you find a wronged bride or the man who has been selling you a war." For one heartbeat, the whole hall hung silent. Then Yorath, who had not become old among wolves by being slow, said, "A search costs an innocent man nothing," and nodded to his own guard, and Halvard's honest grey face came apart at last into the thing that had always been underneath it. He did not argue. He had never been a man to waste a moment once the game was lost. He came off the dais straight at her, with a blade already sliding from his sleeve, fast, faster than a man that size had any right to be, and the hall screamed. And Osric was too far, and there was no one between the traitor and the woman who had unmade him, but the woman herself. Some cold, clear part of her had known it would come to this, had known from the moment she chose the crowded hall, that a cornered wolf come straight for the throat that named him. But this was the one thing in the whole long winter she knew how to do, without thinking, and he was the one who had taught her how to do it. She turned inside the blade instead of away from it, caught the wrist, felt the old familiar weight of him come past her, and used it, and put him down hard on the stone with his own arm bent up wrong behind him, and her knee in his spine. He heaved once, and went still. She leaned down close to his ear, where only he would hear. "You taught me every lock I just put you in," she said. "You should not have taught me so well." Then the guards had him, and dragged him up. And the ledger, and the coin, and the poison came out of his record room within the hour, exactly where she had said. And it was over. Yorith stood a long time, looking at the proof of the war he had almost bought, and then he did a thing that cost a proud man a great deal. He put his hand on Osric's shoulder before the whole hall, and called him brother, and said there was no need now for any daughter to be spent to buy a piece they already had, and Ingrid, at the high table, closed her eyes for a moment in a relief she did not bother to hide. Ingrid caught Sorrel's eye across the ruined hall then and inclined her head. Once, the way one soldier salutes another who has done the harder thing. Whatever the bride had wanted, it had never been him. And now she was free to go home and want it. And both women knew the other had just been handed back her own life, and neither of them said so, because some things are too large for a crowded room. Osric found Sorrel in the emptying hall. There was no king in his face at all. "You saved my life," he said. "Again, after everything I did. You still. Eloin, the treaty is finished. Yorith is going home in peace. I am free. There is nothing standing between us now, but the truth, and I have told you all of it. Stay." And she looked at the man she loved, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done. Harder than the blade, harder than the walk to the Black Hall, and she shook her head. "You knew who I was," she said, "and you let me love you in the dark for a month, and never once trusted me with it. I am glad you are alive. You will be a good king. But I have spent my whole life being a thing that other men aimed, and I do not know yet who I am when no one is aiming me. I cannot come to you as another man's weapon or another man's woman. I have to find out first what is left when I am no one's at all." She stepped back from him, and it broke her to do it, and she did it anyway. "Goodbye, Osric." And she walked out of the hall, and left the king standing alone in it, and did not look back, because, if she had looked back, she would never have gone. In the end, it took the better part of a year, and most of the work was hers, not his. They made her warden of the hunt. There was no one else in the realm who could have held it, and the wardens, shamed by the rot Halvard had grown among them, took her hand and her orders both, and under her the guard ran clean, for the first time in 20 years. She was good at it. She had always known she would be. What she had not known was how it would feel to command a thing and answer to no one, to be aimed by no hand but her own, and it turned out that it felt like slowly learning to breathe. She did the harder work in the quiet. She took apart, thought by thought, the grievance Halvard had grown in her, and sorted the true from the planted, and found that when she was done there was still a great deal that was true and hers and worth carrying. Only now she carried it because she had chosen it, and not because he had put it there. She went out to the Pharaoh camps herself, as warden, and as a Loan both, and Osric came with her and did not perform and did not promise more than he could keep, and began, slowly, clumsily, honestly, to make right the things that could still be made right. He sent her no flowers. He knew her better than that. He simply kept turning up where the work was, and asking nothing, and going home again. There were days she almost sent for him, and did not. There were nights the warm patient thread of him ran under her ribs whether she willed it or no, and she let it ache and did not act, because she had promised herself that the next time she chose a man, it would be as a whole woman on her own feet, and not as a stray still grateful to anyone who did not kick her. Bly thought her mad. Marn, who understood her better, said only that some walks a person takes alone, and put the kettle on, and let her be. The candle sat on her sill the whole year, unlit. She could not throw it away. She had stopped pretending. She did not know why. Then one gray morning at the turn of the cold, the king of all the northern wood was gone. His chamber was empty. His sword stood on its stand, his cloak on its peg. No horse drawn from the stables, no sign of any struggle, the room neat and ordered and still, and on the sill, set with care, dead in the center of the stone, one candle burned. The hold went to uproar within the hour, wardens shouting, the last of Halvard's scattered friends blamed in a dozen frightened mouths, and it was the warden of the hunt they came running to, white-faced, to say the king had been taken. Sorrel stood in the empty chamber a long time and did not run. She looked at the sword he would never have left if he were fighting for his life. She looked at the room, emptied by no hand but his own. She looked at the candle, and she knew it now, knew it all the way down. The oldest right of his people, older than the crown. The one I did not choose aloud, is the one I chose in truth. Come and find me. He had turned her own worst morning inside out and handed it back to her as an invitation. For one moment, the old fear rose exactly as it had a year before, the cold that said they have taken him, you are too late. And then it broke, and underneath was something she had almost forgotten how to feel. She laughed, once wet and startled, alone in the empty room. She had understood at last and all at once what a candle in an empty room had been trying to tell her since the coldest night of the worst winter of her life. She did not wake the trackers. She did not need them. She had been the best tracker in the realm before she was ever anything else, and she did not need a scent to find this man. She went out through the east postern alone in the pre-dawn cold, down the old path she had not let herself walk in a year, out to the ragged edge of the deep wood, where a king had once eased a thorn from a lame hound's paw, with hands too careful for a stranger, and where a thing that had no name had begun. He was there. Of course he was there. He sat on the frost with his collar open and no crown and no king anywhere about him, only the man from the dark, and when he saw her come out of the trees, his whole tired face broke open into something that hurt to look at. "You found me," he said. "You made it easy," she said. "You always were a poor hand at hiding, for a man with so many secrets." He got to his feet. He did not cross to her, because he had learned at long last to wait. "I chose wrong the first time," he said. "In the daylight, in front of the whole pack, I chose another future because I was afraid, and I lit a candle in the dark and asked you to carry my courage for me. And that was the coward's way, and you were right to hate it." He drew a breath, and this time there was no right, no dark, no hiding. "So I am doing it plain. No candle, no screen. Here is the king in the daylight choosing his future out loud, and it is you, Ilowen. It has been you since the frost. I am not daring you, and I am not owed anything, and I will turn around and walk back to my empty room right now, if you tell me to. But I would rather spend the rest of my life at the edge of this wood, asking than one more day anywhere at all, pretending I chose right the first time." She looked at him a long moment, the cold coming up off the ground, her whole life behind her, rearranged and sorted and finally her own. Then she lifted her hand and folded two fingers slow against her palm and held them there. It was their sign, from the frost and the dark. It had always meant, wait, I am here, not yet. She gave it back to him, meaning something else, entirely. He crossed the frost then, and she let him, and when he reached her, she was already reaching back. And there was no crowd for it and no right, and no war, and no one aiming either of them at anything at all. There was only the wood, and the cold, and the plain, unbearable fact of being chosen, out loud, in the light. They did not marry in the great hall with the whole city cheering. That had never been theirs. They stood up one ordinary morning at the ragged edge of the deep wood, with Nettle Gray and Content between them, and Ingrid come back north as a friend and not a bride, and Bly weeping and pretending not to, and Mar not pretending anything, and the Pharaoh and the Duncrag folk mingled together the way Halvard had swum his whole life to keep them apart. Osric cried during the vows. She had known he would. She very nearly did not. And the near thing gave her away entirely, and he laughed at her through his own tears, and she stopped minding who saw. Wareth sent word from the north that he was gladder than he could say. There was a wedding and not a war. Somewhere far below the old fort, a cell held the man who had spent 20 years making certain this exact morning could never come, and Sorrel found, standing in the cold sun with Osric's hand in hers, that she did not think of him at all. "You are stuck with me now," he said when it was done. "Lo, only for her, I have chosen you out loud. There is no unlighting that candle." "I found you," she said. "You never once thanked me for that. I have the rest of my life," he said. "I mean to be thorough." She kissed him, at the edge of the wood where it had all begun, and for once in her life she did not argue, and she did not watch the shadows, and she did not keep score.